What happens when the most dangerous man in New York City gets down on his knees, not to pray, not to beg, not to threaten, but to tie a white satin ribbon in his 13-year-old daughter's hair? And what happens when that ribbon comes back, stained with red ink, and the man who stained it has no idea whose child he just broke? But before we go any further, remember one thing. In this story, there is an object that almost no one knows about. A small piece of white satin with red stains that Bumpy Johnson carried in the inside pocket of his suit jacket for 10 straight days. Never washed, never removed, never shown. Those who saw him take it out and stare at those red ink blotches. Nat McKay saw it twice. Herbert Bruce once, never asked questions. Because the expression on his face in those seconds made people stop breathing. And one time, staring at that ribbon in the back room of a barber shop on 145th Street, Bumpy spoke 11 words. 11 words that explain everything. Why he never laid a finger on the teacher, why he chose paper instead of fists, and why this story became the lesson that Harlem still retells to this day. Those 11 words are the most important part of everything you will hear today, but we will get to them at the very end, because to truly understand them, you need to walk the entire path first, from white ribbon to the last falling brick. Harlem, New York. It was a Monday, the 7th of September, 1959, approximately 6:53 in the morning. The apartment on 159th Street in Upper Harlem smelled of coffee brewing on the stove, pressed cotton, and the faint sweetness of hair oil warming on the bathroom sink. 3 bedrooms, Italian furniture that Bumpy Johnson had personally selected from a warehouse in Brooklyn, paying cash, no receipt, no questions. A Persian rug worth more than a police officer earned in an entire year spread across the living room floor, its crimson and gold pattern catching the first pale light bleeding through the curtains. And in the hallway between the kitchen and the front door, a 13-year-old girl named Elise Johnson stood in front of the mirror holding 2 ribbons, one white, one pale blue, trying to decide which one matched her new school blouse better. Bumpy Johnson, Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, though nobody called him that and lived comfortably, stood behind his daughter. He was 53 years old, 5'8", 172 pounds of compact, deliberate muscle, wrapped in a white undershirt and pressed gray trousers. His suit jacket hanging on the back of a kitchen chair, not yet needed at this hour. His hands, the same hands that had broken a man's 2 ribs 3 days earlier over a debt of $4,000 at a gambling parlor on Lenox Avenue, hung at his sides, fingers slightly curled as though they were never fully at rest. His face was the face that made precinct captains lower their voices and Italian capos choose their words carefully. Hard jaw, eyes that cataloged everything and revealed nothing. A thin scar along his left cheekbone from 1937, barely visible now but still there, a permanent receipt from a knife fight he had won decisively. But this morning, in this hallway, with the smell of coffee and hair oil and the sound of his wife Margaret humming something slow in the kitchen, Bumpy Johnson was not the man that Harlem feared. He was a father, and his daughter could not decide on a ribbon. The white one, he said. His voice, that low, measured instrument that could fill a room without ever rising above conversation, was soft, almost gentle. White goes with everything. Your mother taught me that. Elise laughed. White goes with everything. Mama taught you about ribbons. Your mother taught me about everything worth knowing. He took the white satin ribbon from her hand and stepped closer. His fingers, thick, scarred across the knuckles, built for violence, fumbled with the delicate fabric. The bow would not come out even. He tried again. The left loop sagged. He pulled it apart. Tried a third time. Elise watched him in the mirror, her lips pressing together to keep from giggling, and Bumpy Johnson, the man whose name silenced entire city blocks, whose nod could close casinos and redistribute fortunes, whose displeasure had caused men to leave New York permanently, could not tie a bow. "Daddy, let me—" "I've got it." A pause. The fourth attempt produced something lopsided but recognizable. "There!" Elise tilted her head, examining the result with the devastating honesty of a 13-year-old. "It's crooked. It's character." Behind them, Margaret stood in the kitchen doorway. She was 47, slender, with hands that never stopped moving, wiping counters, adjusting curtains, smoothing fabric, and eyes that missed nothing. She watched her husband kneel before their daughter, this man who commanded an empire of numbers, rackets, gambling operations, and protection arrangements stretching from 110th Street to 155th, and she saw what nobody outside this apartment ever saw. Tenderness so raw it looked like pain. On the kitchen table beneath the morning edition of the Amsterdam News, the headline read, "School Integration, a New Era," lay 2 unloaded revolvers covered by a cloth napkin so that Elise would never see them. This was the architecture of Bumpy Johnson's life. Love and violence separated by a napkin. A daughter and an empire sharing the same breakfast table. If you enjoy stories like this one, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss our next video. But this morning was different from other mornings. This morning, Margaret was not humming because she was happy. She was humming because she was afraid. Because in 40 minutes, her daughter, her only daughter, her brilliant, book-devouring, Shakespeare-reading, doctor-dreaming daughter would walk into a building where the Johnson name was not a shield. It was a target. Bumpy led Elise to the black Cadillac waiting at the curb. Julius, 6'4", a former light heavyweight boxer who had fought at Madison Square Garden before taking a more reliable position as Bumpy's personal driver and bodyguard, opened the rear door. But before Elise could climb in, Bumpy caught her hand. Not roughly, the way you hold something that could break. He crouched down, his eyes level with hers. Morning light fell across his face, and for a moment the scar disappeared, and he looked younger, almost vulnerable, like a man standing at the edge of something he could not control. "Elise, look at me." She looked. "You are walking into that school not because someone allowed you to. You are walking in because it is your right. And if anyone, and tells you that you do not belong in that place, you remember his name and you tell me. The rest is my job." Elise nodded. She was not afraid. She did not understand why she should be afraid. She was smart. She loved to read. She wanted to be a doctor. The world, as far as she knew, was a place where smart girls who loved to read could become doctors. She had not yet learned the other lesson, the one that Harlem taught every black child eventually, about what the world did to dreams that came in the wrong color. The Cadillac pulled away from the curb. Bumpy stood on the sidewalk. 3 seconds, 5, 10. The black car turned the corner of 159th and vanished. And Bumpy Johnson, standing in the September morning cool of Harlem, felt something he had not felt in many years. Fear. Not for himself, for her. For a 13-year-old girl with a crooked white ribbon heading into a world where his power meant nothing. He turned back to the apartment. Margaret was in the doorway. "She'll be fine," Margaret said, but her voice said something else. Bumpy looked at his wife for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, in that tone that Margaret had learned to recognize over 20 years, the tone that was not a threat but a geological fact, like gravity. If anyone touches my girl, Margaret, if anyone so much as makes her cry. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Margaret put her hand on his shoulder, and they stood in the doorway together, and neither of them spoke, because there was nothing to say that would make the next 7 hours pass any faster. Bumpy went inside, poured coffee, sat down with the financial reports from his gambling operations, the previous night's numbers from 14 locations across Harlem, neatly typed by his bookkeeper and delivered before dawn. An ordinary Monday, ordinary business. He had no idea, no possible way of knowing, that in 4 hours and 20 minutes, a 52-year-old history teacher named Harold Jennings would speak 23 words. 23 words that would destroy his own career, his reputation, his standing in the community, everything he had built in 30 years. And this teacher, here is what made it truly terrifying, would speak those words voluntarily, with pleasure, in front of 32 witnesses. What happens when a man who has felt untouchable for 2 decades picks a fight with the wrong father? You are about to find out. The Warren Academy sat on East 76th Street between Lexington and 3rd Avenue like a monument to inherited certainty. Red brick, white columns, ivy climbing the east wall in disciplined rows, as though even the plants knew better than to grow out of line. Founded in 1839, 120 years of educating the sons and daughters of New York's wealthiest families, sending them to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and then into the law firms, banks, and political offices that ran the country. The building smelled of chalk, old wood, lemon furniture polish, and something harder to name, the particular atmosphere of a place that had never doubted its own importance. Elise walked through the front doors at 7:51 in the morning. Julius had dropped her at the curb and watched until she disappeared inside. His instructions from Bumpy had been specific. She crossed the marble foyer, her shoes making small, careful sounds on the polished floor, and she looked up at the portraits of former headmasters lining the walls. 19 faces, all white, all male, all looking down at her with the same expression of frozen authority. And she thought, I belong here, because her father told her so, and her father was never wrong. The hallway to the history classroom was long and bright. Tall windows on one side, wooden doors with brass numbers on the other. Students moved in clusters, white faces, pressed uniforms, conversations about summer houses on Long Island and new cars their fathers had bought. And as Elise walked through them, the clusters thinned, not dramatically, not with gasps or pointed fingers, just a subtle redistribution, like water flowing around a stone, eyes that glanced and looked away, conversations that dipped in volume as she passed and rose again behind her. She was the only black face in the hallway, the only black student in the entire 8th grade, one of only 2 in the entire school. The other was a 10th grader named William Harris, who ate lunch alone in the library every day and had learned over 2 years the particular art of being invisible. Bumpy Johnson was a man who rarely spoke words that changed people's expressions. In his entire life, those close to him could count on one hand the moments when he said something that made the air leave a room. One of those moments, 11 words spoken while looking at a stained ribbon, is still ahead. Elise found her seat in the history classroom, room 212, 2nd floor, 3rd row by the window. 32 desks made of dark, polished wood, arranged in 4 precise rows of 8. 31 were already occupied by white faces. The 32nd, hers, sat in a small pool of sunlight near the window. She placed her notebook on the desk, folded her hands the way her mother had taught her, and waited. The clock on the wall above the door read 12 minutes past 8. Harold Edward Jennings entered the classroom at exactly 8:15, 52 years old, 5'10", 168 pounds, distributed loosely across a frame that had once been athletic but had long since surrendered to desk chairs and faculty dinners. Tweed jacket with leather elbow patches, worn at the cuffs but still respectable. The kind of jacket that announced its owner as a man of learning rather than commerce. Neatly trimmed gray mustache, wire-rimmed glasses perched on a nose that had been broken once in college during a rugby match he still talked about. Class of 1929, Columbia University. He had a diploma framed above his desk at home and another in the faculty lounge, positioned so that visitors would see it first. Jennings had been teaching at Warren Academy for 23 years. History, American history specifically, with an emphasis on what he called the Great Narrative, which in practice meant the achievements of white men organized chronologically and presented as inevitable. He had taught the children of senators, the children of judges, the children of bank presidents and newspaper publishers. He had been nominated for Teacher of the Year in 1948. He kept the nomination letter in his desk drawer and reread it on bad days. And for the last 3 years, Harold Jennings had been waging a quiet, efficient war against the integration of Warren Academy, not publicly. Publicly, he smiled and shook hands and said the right things at faculty meetings when the subject came up. But privately, in the faculty lounge, over afternoon tea with his colleague Doris Mackenzie, in careful conversations at parent committee meetings, Jennings had organized resistance. He was the secretary of an unofficial parent committee that had, in the spring of 1958, collected 112 signatures on a petition against integrating the school. The petition had been rejected following the Supreme Court's ruling in Brown versus the Board of Education, but Jennings had found another method, quieter, more effective, more deniable, lowered grades, small humiliations, isolation, a consistent, invisible pressure applied with the patience of a man who understood that you did not need to slam a door in someone's face. You just needed to make the room uncomfortable enough that they left on their own. In 3 years, 4 black students had enrolled at Warren Academy. Marcus Caldwell, age 11, enrolled in September 1956, withdrawn by his mother by December. Patricia Simmons, age 12, enrolled September 1957, withdrawn by February. James Walter, age 13, September 1957, gone by March. Diana Hope, age 11, September 1958, withdrawn within 6 weeks. 4 children, 4 broken starts, 4 families who left, believing that their children simply could not keep up. Jennings bragged about it in the faculty lounge. He called it natural selection. He told Doris Mackenzie, who sat 3 feet away, listening, saying nothing, storing every word in a memory that would eventually fill 7 typed pages, that the school was correcting a mistake, and that by the time he was finished, no colored family would bother trying again. Elise Johnson was the 5th. The first test came at the end of the first week, 10 questions on early American history. Elise answered all 10. She knew the material not because she had studied the night before, but because she had read ahead 3 chapters, the way she always did, the way she had been reading since she was 7. She checked each answer twice. She wrote neatly, in the careful cursive her mother had taught her. She handed the paper in with 7 minutes to spare and sat quietly, folding her hands, while the other students finished. Monday, the 7th of September, 12 minutes past noon, the clock above the door, the slow sweep of its second hand. Harold Jennings stood at the front of the classroom with a stack of graded tests, and the air smelled of chalk dust and wood polish and the particular tension that 32 13-year-olds generate when grades are about to be distributed. Jennings moved down the rows, placing each test paper face down on each desk with a small, satisfied motion, the gesture of a man performing a ritual he considered sacred. "Excellent work, Sarah." A smile. "Well done, Thomas." A nod. "Good improvement, Catherine." Another smile. Praise distributed like communion wafers to the faithful. He reached the third row, the window seat, the only black face in the room. He did not place the test on the desk. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, just two fingers, extended at arm's length, the way a person holds a dead rat by the tail, and dropped it. The paper slapped the wood. The sound cut through the classroom like a hand across a face. On the cover, in red ink so thick it had bled through to the second page, the letter F. Elise opened the test. Every answer crossed out, red lines slashing through her handwriting, not the careful marks of correction, but violent diagonal strokes as though someone had attacked the page in anger. Question 3. When was the Declaration of Independence signed? Her answer, 1776, crossed out. Question 5. Who issued the Emancipation Proclamation? Her answer, Abraham Lincoln, crossed out. Question 7. Question 9. Every answer correct. Every answer marked wrong. She raised her hand. Jennings turned to the blackboard. She raised it higher. He wrote a date on the board. 1787, the Constitutional Convention. Elise stood up. 31 heads turned. The room went silent. That particular silence that falls over a group of children when someone does something unexpected, something that could go terribly wrong, something that everyone will talk about at lunch. "Mr. Jennings." Her voice was steady. 13 years old, and her voice was steady. "I believe there has been a mistake. My answers on questions 3, 5, and 7 match the textbook exactly." Jennings turned from the blackboard, slowly, the way a man turns when he wants you to feel the weight of his attention. The piece of chalk in his right hand, white, dusty, ordinary, snapped in half. He did not seem to notice. Half the chalk fell to the floor. The other half stayed in his grip, pressed between his fingers hard enough to powder. And in the silence of that classroom, where the only sounds were the ticking of the clock above the door and the faint hum of the radiator beneath the window and the collective held breath of 31 children, Harold Jennings spoke 23 words. "Blacks do not belong in this school. You can copy answers from a book, but you will never be one of us. Sit down." This was the most expensive mistake of Harold Jennings's life, because what happened next would not just end his career, it would erase him, completely, permanently, in a way that no one in that classroom could have predicted, and certainly not Jennings himself, who stood there with chalk dust on his fingers, believing he was untouchable. Someone on the back row giggled. A short, nervous sound, quickly swallowed. Someone else looked down at their desk. Another student shifted in their chair. 31 faces, and not one mouth opened to object. Not one voice rose. Not one 13-year-old in that room found the courage or the decency to say, "That is wrong." Elise stood for 3 more seconds. Her hands gripped the edge of her desk so tightly that her knuckles went pale against her dark skin. The white ribbon in her hair, the one her father had tied that morning with clumsy, careful fingers, was spattered with red ink. When Jennings had dropped the test, the pen on her desk had jumped and left marks across the satin, spots that looked like drops of blood on snow. She sat down. She did not cry, not here, not in front of them. She would not give them that. She cried in the car. At 3:16 in the afternoon, when Julius pulled up to the school entrance and she climbed into the back seat of the black Cadillac and the door closed and the outside world disappeared behind tinted glass, she cried. Quietly at first, small hitching breaths, the kind that a child makes when they are trying to hold something enormous inside a body that is too small to contain it. Then harder, then in great shaking sobs that fogged the windows. Julius looked in the rearview mirror. He saw her face. He saw the stained ribbon. His hands tightened on the steering wheel until the leather creaked and his knuckles turned white. And in 12 years of working for Bumpy Johnson, 12 years of driving, waiting, watching, and occasionally doing things that required him not to ask questions, Julius had never once had the thought that crossed his mind now, God help the man who did this. He did not ask what happened. He did not need to. He drove. And Jennings, at that same moment, 3:16 on a Monday afternoon, sat in the Warren Academy faculty lounge with a cup of Earl Grey tea and told his colleague Doris Mackenzie what he considered an amusing anecdote about a Negro girl who tried to argue about a grade. He chuckled. Doris managed a thin smile. Jennings sipped his tea. This was the last time in his life that he would drink tea in this faculty lounge with a light heart. He did not know it yet, but in exactly 26 minutes, a black Cadillac would stop at a brownstone on 159th Street, and a 13-year-old girl with a stained ribbon would walk up the stairs to her father. And the world of Harold Jennings, his career, his reputation, his identity, everything, would begin to collapse. 3:42 in the afternoon. The apartment door opened. Bumpy was in his armchair reading financial reports, the afternoon numbers from 6 locations on the west side of Harlem. He heard the footsteps, not the running, bouncing, skipping steps of a child coming home excited. Slow steps, heavy steps, the steps of a 13-year-old carrying something invisible and crushing on her shoulders. He looked up, wet cheeks, red eyes, and the white ribbon, the same ribbon, spotted with red like a wound on silk. Bumpy Johnson did not jump up, did not shout, did not reach for the telephone. He did what no one who knew only his reputation would have expected. He set the papers aside, slowly pulled a chair to the couch, sat down across from Elise, his eyes level with hers. He opened a small leather notebook, the same one he normally used to record debts, addresses, and the operational details of his gambling empire, and he took out a pencil. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. Take your time." For 47 minutes he listened. He asked short questions, names, times, exact words, who sat next to her, who laughed, who stayed silent, how many students in the class, were there other teachers in the hallway. He wrote everything down in the leather notebook with the focus of an experienced investigator, gentle, sequential, returning to details, never interrupting, never rushing. When Elise repeated the words, "Blacks do not belong in this school," the pencil in Bumpy's hand stopped for half a second. Margaret, standing in the kitchen doorway, saw the muscles along his jaw tighten so hard that the skin on his cheekbones stretched taut. The vein at his temple began to pulse, but the voice stayed the same, soft, fatherly, patient. When Elise finished, Bumpy closed the notebook, kissed her forehead. "Go wash up, baby girl. Mama will give you apple pie." Elise left. The door to her room closed, and in that moment Margaret saw what she had seen only 3 times in 20 years of marriage. Bumpy Johnson removed the mask. His face was not angry, not furious. It was empty, completely empty. The face of a man who has already made a decision and is now simply calculating the steps. "Don't do anything you'll regret," Margaret said. Bumpy looked at her, a long look. Then he smiled. But this was not the smile from the morning, the one he wore while tying a ribbon. This smile was cold, precise, mathematical. "Margaret, this man looked into my daughter's eyes and told her she is nothing. My daughter, who reads Shakespeare at 13. My daughter who wants to be a doctor. He did not just give her a grade. He tried to break her spine. Not the physical one, the one inside. The one that lets a person stand straight." He paused. "And you know what I am going to do. I am not going to touch him. Not one hair on his head. I am going to take everything he thinks is his job, his name, his respect, his future. I am going to take it the same way he tried to take it from my girl. The only difference is, Elise is somebody, and he, when I am finished, will be nobody." Bumpy walked to the hallway table where Elise had set down the ribbon. He picked it up, looked at the red stains, folded it carefully, once, twice, 4 times, into a small square, and placed it in the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Margaret saw this but did not ask. She had been married to this man long enough to know when questions were welcome and when silence was the only safe language. Remember that ribbon, white satin with red stains. Right here, as Bumpy stood in the living room staring at the ink spots his daughter had brought home. Right here is where the decision was born. Not the plan, not the strategy, the decision. He had not yet spoken those 11 words, but they already existed. Somewhere in the space between his fury and his control, 11 words were forming, and they would not be spoken until the moment was exactly right. But now, back to what he did next, because the 3 phone calls he made in the next hour would change everything. At 4:44 in the afternoon on Monday, the 7th of September, Bumpy Johnson walked to the telephone in the hallway and dialed the first number. The person on the other end was not a gangster, not an enforcer, not a man who solved problems with his hands. It was Herbert Bruce, a black attorney with a Harvard Law degree, class of 1947, who specialized in civil rights cases and who owed Bumpy a favor dating back to 1953, when Bumpy had quietly arranged for certain charges against Bruce's younger brother to disappear from the court docket. The second call went to Reverend William James, pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church on 138th Street, whose congregation numbered 4,000 souls, and whose voice, when raised from the pulpit, could shake stained glass and reshape public opinion across 5 boroughs. The third call, and this call would have surprised anyone who knew Bumpy only as a gangster, went to Ethel Payne, the journalist they called the First Lady of the Black Press, whose nationally syndicated column in the Chicago Defender was read by more black Americans than any other publication in the country. 3 calls, 3 people from 3 entirely different worlds, and not one of them refused. Not one hesitated. Not one asked why. Because when Bumpy Johnson asked, it was not a request, but also because each of them, hearing what had happened to a 13-year-old girl in a classroom on 76th Street, said the same word, when. Not why, not how, not are you sure, when. Because what Jennings did was not an attack on a gangster's daughter. It was an attack on every black child who had ever heard, "You don't belong here." And Bumpy Johnson was about to respond to that attack in a way that no one expected. For the first time in his life, he was going to destroy a man without breaking a single law. And that, as everyone involved would eventually understand, would be more terrifying than any violence he had ever committed. Tuesday, the 8th of September, 7 o'clock in the morning. The back room of Williams' barber shop on 145th Street and Lenox Avenue, the unofficial headquarters of Bumpy Johnson's operations. The smell of aftershave, hot shaving oil, and fresh brewed coffee. A round table covered in green felt, the poker table normally, where Bumpy's inner circle played 5-card draw on Thursday nights. But today there were no cards. Today there was a folder, assembled overnight, thick as a man's thumb. There was a folder on the cover in pencil. Jennings, H. Bumpy had not slept. The suit was fresh, charcoal gray, pressed, not a wrinkle, but the eyes told the truth, red at the edges, focused with the intensity of a man running on something stronger than rest. He sat at the table. Herbert Bruce sat across from him, yellow legal pad open, fountain pen ready. Nat McKay, Bumpy's right hand for 11 years, a man built like a truck engine and twice as reliable, stood by the door with an unlit cigar between his teeth, arms crossed, watching. Bumpy opened the folder and began reading aloud. Harold Edward Jennings, 52 years old. Warren Academy, 23 years, not a single formal complaint. Wife Dorothy née Patterson. 2 adult sons, Harold Jr., an insurance adjuster in White Plains, and Robert, a sales representative for a pharmaceutical company in New Jersey. House in Bronxville. Mortgage paid off in 1954. Member of St. Mark's Methodist Church. Coached the school's junior cricket team from 1941 to 1949. Nominated for Teacher of the Year, 1948. Clean, said Bruce, scanning the page. Keep reading, said Bumpy. Page 3. Secretary of the Unofficial Parent Committee Against School Integration. 112 signatures collected spring of 1958. Petition rejected following Brown versus Board of Education. But Jennings continued his campaign through other means: grade manipulation, verbal intimidation, social isolation. Systematic, documented if you knew where to look. 4 black students enrolled in 3 years. All 4 withdrawn before completing a single full semester. Jennings referenced this in the faculty lounge. His phrase, natural selection. Bumpy closed the folder. He was silent for 20 seconds. Bruce would later say he counted. Then Bumpy said, "He is not alone. Behind him is a system. He survives because the system protects him. So we do not attack him. He survives, we attack the system. And the system stands on 3 legs: money, reputation, and connections. Remove 1, it wobbles. Remove 2, it falls. Remove all 3, and Jennings is standing alone in the rubble." He picked up a pencil and drew 3 circles on a sheet of paper. In the first, he wrote, money. In the second, reputation. In the third, connections. And he began to fill each circle with names and details. Nat McKay, standing by the door with his unlit cigar, noticed Bumpy pause mid-sentence and touch the left side of his chest, there where the inside pocket held a square of folded satin with red stains. He did not know that 400 blocks south, in a prestigious school on 76th Street, Jennings was at this very second telling colleagues yet another amusing story, unaware that a man with a stained ribbon in his pocket was carrying a decision as hard as granite and waiting only for the right moment. Bumpy removed his hand from his pocket and picked up the pencil. Time to fill in the circles. "Herbert," he said, leaning forward, "tell me, if 5 mothers file simultaneous complaints with the City Board of Education alleging systematic racial discrimination by one teacher, and none of them mentions my name, how long before the board opens an investigation?" Bruce thought for 5 seconds. 2 to 3 weeks. Too long. What if the complaint is accompanied by an article in the Amsterdam News and the Chicago Defender? And what if simultaneously the pastor of the largest church in Harlem tells 4,000 congregation members that a school on 76th Street is expelling black children. 3 to 5 days. And if we add a phone call from someone who knows where the school's donation money comes from and can explain to those donors that their names will appear in newspapers next to the word racism? Bruce slowly set down his pen. 48 hours. Bumpy smiled. 48 hours. Herbert, have you ever destroyed a man using nothing but paper and a telephone? Bruce shook his head. Neither have I, said Bumpy. First time for everything. He stood, looked at McKay. Nat, gather the people. Wednesday, 8 p.m., back room at Wells. Everyone I name. He pulled a folded sheet from his pocket. Names, written in his own hand, the ink still fresh. And one more thing. Find me the mothers. Marcus Caldwell, Patricia Simmons, James Walter, Diana Hope, the 4 children who left Warren Academy before Elise. Find them by tomorrow morning. I want them in that room on Wednesday night. McKay took the list, nodded, and left without a word. Bumpy turned back to Bruce. 48 hours, Herbert. That is how long Jennings has. He just does not know it yet. He had said it as a fact, the way a doctor states a diagnosis, without emotion, without pleasure, with the calm certainty of a man who has seen the result before the process has begun. This was not a plan built on anger. This was arithmetic, and the numbers, as Bumpy Johnson counted them, did not add up in Harold Jennings's favor. Wednesday, the 9th of September, 8:11 in the evening. The back room of Wells Restaurant on 7th Avenue, the place where Harlem decided its business behind closed doors. The smell of fried chicken, waffles, cigarette smoke, and something else. Something electric, like the air before a thunderstorm. 26 chairs arranged in a semicircle. 26 people who, under any other circumstances, would never have sat at the same table. Herbert Bruce, in a Brooks Brothers suit, legal pad on his knee. Reverend William James in a black cassock, his large hands folded in his lap. Nat McKay with the unlit cigar, standing near the door as always. 3 barber shop owners from Lenox Avenue. 2 pharmacists, one from 125th Street, one from 145th. 5 mothers, Vivian Caldwell, Ruth Simmons, Dorothy Walter, Annette Hope, and Margaret Johnson, who had come not as Bumpy's wife, but as Elise's mother. A delegate from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. A reporter from the Amsterdam News with a steno pad. A teacher from Public School 136 who had known Elise since first grade and could testify to her academic ability. The owner of a funeral home on Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard who quietly financed half of Harlem's community initiatives. And 4 men of no particular occupation seated by the door, whose presence ensured that not a word would leave this room unauthorized. Bumpy stood against the far wall, arms crossed, half smile. He waited for silence. Silence came instantly. He did not make a speech. He placed 5 photographs on the table. 5 black children. Elise, Marcus, Patricia, James, Diana. 5 faces looking up from the glossy paper, placed among ashtrays full of cigarette butts and cups of cooling coffee. 5 children, he said. His voice, that characteristic half-whisper that made people lean forward and catch every word, filled the room without effort. 1 teacher, 3 years. Every one of these children walked into a school to learn. Everyone was pushed out. Humiliations, false grades, words that made a child come home and ask their mother, "Mama, is it true that I am worse than them?" Vivian Caldwell stood up. She was 43, a seamstress who worked 12-hour shifts at a garment factory on 8th Avenue, and her hands that stitched buttonholes with machine precision, were shaking. Her voice cracked on the first word, and she did not try to fix it. My son, my Marcus. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. Every night, every single night for 3 months, he came home and cried. And I thought he was weak. I told him, "Try harder, study more. You are not working hard enough." She stopped, swallowed. He was 11 years old. He was working as hard as he could, but that man gave him failing marks on correct answers, and my boy decided he was stupid. My boy decided he did not deserve to be there, and I, his mother, I believed it. I believed that man instead of believing my own child. She sat down. The room was silent. Ruth Simmons stood. Patricia, 1957. Same story, same teacher, same words. Blacks don't belong here. Dorothy Walter stood. James, 1957. Same. Annette Hope stood. Diana, 1958. Same classroom, same red ink, same sentence, spoken with the same casual cruelty, as though crushing a child's future was no more significant than correcting a spelling error. By the time the last mother sat down, the silence in the room could have been cut with a blade. 26 people staring at 5 photographs and understanding, some for the first time, that this was not about Bumpy Johnson's daughter. This was about a system, a machine designed to grind down black children one by one, quietly, efficiently, without leaving fingerprints. Bumpy waited. 10 seconds. 15. He let the silence do its work, let it press down on every person in that room until the weight was unbearable. And right here, as Bumpy stood against the wall of Wells' restaurant, looking at 5 photographs, the ribbon moved from his pocket to his hand. He took it out. White satin with red stains. Unfolded it. Laid it on the table next to the photographs. 26 people stared at that piece of fabric, and the room went quieter than it had been when the mothers spoke. A deeper silence, a heavier one. Nat McKay, a man who had watched Bumpy break people with a single look, a man who thought nothing could surprise him anymore, stepped back half a pace, not from fear, from understanding of what stood behind that ribbon. What exactly did Bumpy say in that second, looking at the red stains? What were those 11 words? Soon, the red stains. But first, the plan. Because the plan was the weapon, and the ribbon was the reason. Bumpy put the ribbon back in his pocket, and his voice turned businesslike. Elise is the 5th. She will be the last. Not because I am her father, but because we are here, all 26 of us, and we are going to do what this man does not expect. We are not going to break his legs. We are going to break his world, with his own methods, paper, law, truth. Only our paper will be sharper, our law more precise, and our truth louder. He looked around the semicircle. Every face, one by one. I am not asking you to break the law. I am asking you to use it. Every letter, every paragraph, every loophole. Jennings thinks the law is on his side. We are going to show him that the law is a weapon, and we know how to use it better than he does. He stepped forward and began distributing assignments with the efficiency of a general deploying battalions. Herbert, formal complaint to the City Board of Education. 5 mothers as complainants. 14 pages, filed by Friday morning, copy to the Board of Trustees of Warren Academy. Bruce nodded, pen already moving. Reverend James, Sunday sermon. Theme, those who close doors before children. 4,000 people will hear the name Warren Academy from the pulpit of the most powerful church in Harlem. The Reverend inclined his head, a slow, deliberate movement that carried the weight of absolute commitment. Ethel is not here tonight, but I spoke with her this morning. The Chicago Defender will run a feature by next Saturday, national circulation. She needs the mother's statements by Thursday. Herbert will coordinate. Mothers, a collective letter to the Warren Academy Board of Trustees, signed by all 5 of you, copies to the Amsterdam News, the New York Post, and the Chicago Defender. Each letter includes specific dates, specific quotes, specific grades, and each letter ends with one sentence: "We ask for justice." If we do not receive it, we will demand it publicly. Reynolds, the Amsterdam News reporter, looked up from his steno pad. "You have an exclusive. Run it Saturday. Front page, if your editor has the nerve. If not, page 3. Either way, names, photos, quotes." Nat. McKay straightened against the door frame. "You will visit the businesses that supply Warren Academy. Stationery, flowers, wine for their events, catering. You will explain to them politely, Nat, I mean politely, that doing business with a school that throws out black children is going to look very unfortunate when the newspapers arrive. You do not threaten. You inform. There is a difference, and I trust you to understand it." McKay removed the cigar from his mouth. Politely, politely. And finally, Doris Mackenzie, a teacher at Warren Academy. She has been there for 20 years. She has seen everything Jennings has done. She has heard every word he has said in that faculty lounge. And for 20 years she has said nothing, because she was afraid of losing her job. Someone will contact her and explain that the silence is over, that there is protection now, that her testimony, written, signed, detailed, will be the difference between this working and this failing. Bumpy looked at the room one last time. 7 strikes, simultaneous, legal complaint, press coverage, church sermon, mother's letters, supplier pressure, donor exposure, inside testimony, 7 directions at once, every one of them legal, every one of them documented, and by the time Jennings understands what is happening, the walls will already be falling. He paused. Friday. Everything begins Friday, 48 hours. 95% of people faced with a system this entrenched would have given up, would have pulled their child out of school and accepted the injustice, would have told themselves that the world was unfair and moved on. But Bumpy Johnson was the 5% who looked at the impossible and saw a blueprint. By 11 o'clock, the room had emptied. Chairs stood at angles, ashtrays overflowed, coffee rings marked the table around the 5 photographs, which Bumpy carefully collected and placed back in the folder. The ribbon, he had checked it once more before leaving. A quick glance, the red stains catching the overhead light, was back in his pocket. McKay lingered at the door. "Bumpy, what if it doesn't work? What if the school just ignores everything?" Bumpy fastened the folder, looked at Nat. "Nat, have you ever seen a man stay standing when 7 bricks fall on him at the same time?" Nat shook his head. "Neither have I." Harold Jennings, at that exact moment, was sitting in his living room in Bronxville with a cup of chamomile tea and his wife Dorothy, telling her about what he called a wonderful start to the school year. He had assigned a new essay topic, the westward expansion, and was pleased with the classroom's response. He was also pleased with himself, although he did not say this part aloud, for having dealt so efficiently with the situation in the 3rd row. The Negro girl would transfer out by October, he was certain. They always did. It was simply a matter of making the environment clear. He sipped his tea. Dorothy asked about the weekend plans. He suggested a drive to Connecticut to see the leaves changing. He had no idea that in 36 hours the first brick would land on his head, and behind it, the second, the third, the fourth, and by the time the 7th fell, there would be nothing left of his 30-year career except dust and a signature on a piece of paper that he never wanted to sign. Because the thing about bricks, as Bumpy Johnson understood better than most, is that 1 brick is a nuisance. 2 bricks are a problem, but 7 bricks, falling simultaneously from 7 different directions, That is an extinction event. And Harold Jennings was standing directly beneath them all. Friday, the 11th of September, 1959, 9:14 in the morning. The office of Charles Prescott III, headmaster of Warren Academy, occupied the southeast corner of the building's first floor. Oak desk, inherited from his predecessor, portraits of founders on the walls, men with mutton chops and moral certainty, painted in oils that had darkened with age but not with doubt. The smell of pipe tobacco, old leather, and the particular staleness of a room whose windows had not been opened in 30 years because the noise from 76th Street was considered disruptive to administrative thought. Prescott was 61. Red face, white sideburns, the build of a man who had rowed crew at Yale in 1919 and had been slowly expanding outward ever since. He opened the morning mail with a brass letter opener that had belonged to his father, sorting envelopes into 2 stacks, important and routine, with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had done this every weekday for 30 years. The first envelope was white, standard business size, return address, Bruce and Associates, attorneys at law, 125th Street, New York. Prescott slid it open, 14 pages. On the letterhead of a law firm he had never heard of, addressed simultaneously to the headmaster, the Board of Trustees, and the New York City Board of Education. 5 complainants, Vivian Caldwell, Ruth Simmons, Dorothy Walter, Annette Hope, and Margaret Johnson. 1 respondent, Harold Edward Jennings, teacher of American history. Allegation: systematic racial discrimination in grading, verbal harassment, deliberate creation of a hostile environment designed to force the withdrawal of black students. Supporting evidence: grade comparisons across 3 academic years, contemporaneous notes from parents, specific dates, and direct quotations. Relief requested: immediate investigation, suspension of the teacher pending review, reevaluation of grades for all affected students. Brick 1. Prescott had not finished reading the 3rd page when the telephone rang. His secretary's voice, pitched higher than normal. "Mr. Prescott, a correspondent from the Amsterdam News is on line 2. He says the article runs tomorrow, with your comment or without it." Brick 2. Prescott's hand, still holding page 3, began to tremble. Not violently, just enough to make the paper rustle. He had been headmaster for 30 years. In 30 years, the most serious complaint he had received was a leaking roof in the gymnasium and a parent who objected to the lunch menu in 1951. He had never received a legal filing. He had never been called by a newspaper. He did not know the protocol because there had never been a need for one. He picked up the telephone. "Tell him I will call back within the hour." He set the phone down, picked it up again, dialed the faculty lounge extension. "Harold, come to my office now." Jennings arrived 4 minutes later with a cup of Earl Grey in his right hand and the particular expression of mild annoyance that he wore whenever his routine was interrupted. He sat in the chair across from Prescott's desk, crossed one leg over the other, and raised the teacup to his lips. "What is it, Charles? I have 3rd period in 20 minutes. Prescott pushed the 14 pages across the desk. Jennings set down the teacup. He would not pick it up again, and began to read. By page 2, the color had left his face. By page 4, his jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscles along his neck stood out like cables. By page 7, his hands were shaking. "This is nonsense, absolute nonsense. Some Negroes—" "Harold!" Prescott's voice cracked like a ruler on a desk. "Stop, right now. These are not some Negroes. This is a law firm. 5 complainants. Some Negroes. A copy filed with the City Board of Education. Do you have any idea what this means?" Jennings did not understand. He could not understand because 23 years of impunity had calcified his perception of reality into a shape that no longer accommodated consequences. He had been untouchable for so long that the concept of being touched had become abstract, like a disease that happens to other people. He opened his mouth to argue. He never got the chance, because at 9:37 on that same Friday morning, while Jennings sat in Prescott's office reading the complaint that would end his career, Reverend William James stood in his study at the Abyssinian Baptist Church on 138th Street and dictated the text of Sunday's sermon to his secretary. Title: Pharisees Among Us, on Those Who Close Doors Before God's Children. 4,000 congregation members would hear this sermon in 48 hours. The name Warren Academy would be spoken from the pulpit 3 times. The name Harold Jennings would not be spoken. The Reverend was too skilled for that, but the description would be unmistakable, and by Sunday afternoon every black household in Harlem would know exactly who and what the sermon was about. Brick 3, incoming. At 10:15 Friday morning, Nat McKay walked into the office of Parker & Sons, which had supplied stationery and office materials to Warren Academy for 11 years. McKay did not threaten. He did not raise his voice. He sat across from Mr. Parker, Jr., a nervous man of 38 with a receding hairline and an instinct for self-preservation, and asked a simple question. Did you know that the school you supply has been systematically expelling black children? Are you aware that when this story hits the papers, and it will hit the papers, believe me, your company's name next to the name of that school will look unfortunate? Parker Jr. thought about this for approximately 90 seconds. By 11 o'clock, Parker & Sons had suspended its contract with Warren Academy pending clarification of circumstances. Brick 4. At noon, the collective letter from 5 mothers, delivered by hand to the Warren Academy Board of Trustees. Copies simultaneously dispatched to the Amsterdam News, the New York Post, and the Chicago Defender, each letter signed, each containing specific dates, names, and quotations, each ending with the same sentence. We ask for justice. If we do not receive it, we will demand it publicly. Brick 5. 5 identical white envelopes, delivered to 5 different addresses on the same morning. Same typeface, same format, same closing sentence, like 5 shots fired from the same weapon. And the man who loaded that weapon was sitting in a barber's chair on 145th Street, getting a trim, reading the morning numbers from his gambling operations as though nothing unusual were happening. And Bumpy smiled, that calm, almost tender smile, the same one Nat McKay would see again, 6 days later, in this very barber shop, when he would hear 11 words that would silence him for a full minute. Prescott called the chairman of the Board of Trustees, Walter Hammond, at 2:15 Friday afternoon. His voice trembled for the first time in 30 years. Walter, we have a problem, a serious one, a discrimination complaint, a newspaper calling for comment, 5 mothers, an attorney, a newspaper. And Walter, I just learned one of our suppliers has terminated their contract. In one day. All of this in one day. Hammond was silent for 6 seconds. Who is behind this? I don't know. 5 mothers. An attorney named Herbert Bruce. Find out. Find out fast. Because this does not look like a spontaneous complaint. This looks like a military operation. Hammond was right. It was a military operation, and its general was, at that precise moment, tipping the barber on 145th Street, adjusting his hat in the mirror and checking his watch. Everything on schedule, everything according to plan. Jennings drove home Friday evening in a state he had never experienced. His hands gripped the steering wheel of his 1955 Buick at 10 and 2. and he did not turn on the radio, did not stop for the evening paper, did not notice the leaves beginning to change on the trees along the Hutchinson River Parkway. Dorothy met him at the door with her usual question. "How was your day, dear?" And for the first time in 23 years of teaching, Jennings did not answer. He sat at the dinner table. He pushed food around his plate. He did not look at his wife. He was thinking, this will pass. The complaint will be dismissed. The article will be ignored. Everything will go back to the way it was. He was wrong, because Saturday morning would bring the newspaper, and Sunday morning would bring the sermon, and Monday morning would bring the 6th and 7th bricks, bricks whose existence he could not even imagine. And when he finally discovered who was behind all of it, when the name reached him, and he understood whose daughter he had humiliated in that classroom, the hunter who had felt invincible for 23 years would become the prey, and the prey would run, but there would be nowhere to go.